How to overcome procrastination. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. But what if you're stuck in procrastination, unable to take that first step? The key to overcoming this struggle lies in understanding how your brain's dopamine system works and leveraging it to your advantage. Instead of waiting for motivation to strike, you can actively pull yourself out of an unmotivated state by using a simple yet powerful strategy. So, how can we effectively tackle procrastination? Interestingly, insights from addiction research provide powerful strategies to help us break free from procrastination. It all comes down to this. As I've mentioned multiple times before, the depth of the low after a dopamine high is directly linked to how intense and rapid that peak was. But here's something even more important. The speed at which you recover from that low is also connected to how steep that drop is. Let me break this down as clearly as possible. Imagine you're in a state of low motivation. You're stuck procrastinating. Your first instinct might be to do something small, like tidying up, paying a few bills, or simply waiting for motivation to return. However, as we've discussed before, these approaches are often ineffective, or they only work when a looming deadline forces you into action. In many cases, this leads to either last-minute panic or failing to complete your task altogether. But here's a better approach. If you take that unmotivated state and engage in an activity that is even more challenging or effortful, you can pull yourself out of that dopamine dip much faster. Now, what do I mean by doing something more difficult or painful? Let me be very clear. I am not referring to anything that causes physical harm, emotional distress, or any kind of damage to your well-being. That is absolutely not the point. What I mean is engaging in an activity that requires more effort than the passive state you're currently in. For example, if you're avoiding work by cleaning your house, you might think, well, at least I'm being productive. However, in reality, in those moments, it may seem like you're being productive by doing small tasks instead of your main goal, but that's not entirely true. Otherwise, you wouldn't be engaging in them. The reality is that the dopamine system responds to what feels difficult or easy at that particular moment. In other words, if you're feeling unmotivated, the key is to put yourself in a situation that is more challenging than your current state. For instance, if you find yourself idly procrastinating or tending to unrelated tasks instead of focusing on what truly matters, you need to quickly introduce an element of discomfort to shift your state of mind. One way to do this is by engaging in a physically demanding or mentally stimulating activity that is unrelated to your goal, but drastically changes your body's state. A great example is exposure to cold, such as taking a cold shower or immersing yourself in cold water. Not only does this naturally boost dopamine levels over several hours, but for most people, it also creates a sensation of discomfort. That discomfort triggers a faster recovery from the dopamine dip compared to passively waiting for motivation to return or engaging in tasks that require minimal effort. When I mention friction, I'm referring to limbic friction, the internal resistance between your limbic system and your forebrain. This friction works in two directions. Sometimes it manifests as feeling tired and unmotivated, requiring effort to push yourself into action. Limbic friction, the resistance between what you feel and what you need to do, works in two ways. Sometimes you feel tired and unmotivated, requiring effort to energize yourself into action. Other times you feel nervous or anxious, and you need to calm yourself down to move forward despite the discomfort. To clarify this concept, let's consider a common example: exercise. Suppose you struggle with motivation and aim to work out 5 times a week. Yet you keep delaying it. You find yourself checking your phone or handling trivial tasks, activities that require less mental effort than exercising. A common strategy is to commit to just 1 or 5 minutes of exercise, using that small achievement as momentum to continue. This method can be effective because it pushes against the friction and lifts you out of the dopamine dip. However, for many people, even this isn't enough. They complete those few minutes but still don't feel motivated to continue. In such cases, a more effective approach is to engage in something even more uncomfortable than being unmotivated, without causing physical or psychological harm. This means choosing an activity that is significantly more challenging than the task you're avoiding. One highly effective option: exposure to cold, such as a cold shower or ice bath. For many, the mere thought of cold exposure triggers resistance, which makes it an excellent tool. Engaging in an activity that really sucks, but is completely safe, helps deepen the dopamine trough, allowing you to return to baseline motivation faster. So, should you wait for procrastination to fade on its own? Not if you want to be productive. Will it eventually disappear? Possibly. Will an impending deadline push you into action? Maybe. But a better strategy is to take control and actively pull yourself out of that unmotivated state as quickly as possible. Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. Procrastination won't simply fade away on its own, and waiting for motivation is a gamble. Instead, take control, push yourself into discomfort, reset your dopamine levels, and regain momentum. The faster you step out of that unmotivated state, the sooner you can start making real progress toward your goals.